Okay, so let's talk next about installing a guest OS, because really and truly, creating a virtual machine and making the virtual machine useful are kind of two different things. Because if you create you can create virtual machines all day, um, but if you never install the operating system, there's really no point in them. You've just got the framework. It's like um, laying the foundation of a house and then never building it. You can't live in the foundation of a house. You actually have to build the house. What we do to build the house is install a guest OS. So you'll have to make sure that the VM is set to boot to an optical disk. It's not going to try to boot to its hard drive. Now, the easy part is when the hypervisor creates that virtual disk, it's going to create it as an empty file without an optical device, a physical disk, an ISO image, and honestly, if you're doing a lot of VMs, your ISO image is your best shot. Um, in any case, without an optical disk to boot from, say for example, you tell your hypervisor to let the VM reach through and use your physical disk drive, and then read off the CD that you have in the device. This is something actually you can do with, say, an ESXi host. If you don't have the ISO, but you have the disk, and you have an optical drive in your rack-mounted server, you pop it in, you tell it, hey, you can use the physical disk, and it will read it. And the virtual machine will take ownership of that physical disk. Now, that's one of the reasons you probably want to do this with an ISO image, because a whole bunch of different virtual machines can decide that the ISO image is their disk drive. But if you've got a physical disk, all those virtual machines can't share it. So in any case, make sure that you have access to some kind of disk image. If not, it'll do something fun like go through its virtual BIOS, boot to the empty file system, and give you a boot disk not accessible error or something of that nature. So it kind of looks like this. So you're going to have to, and you can actually tune things like the amount of memory. You can tell it the order. Say, do you boot from a floppy? Is there a floppy? Do you boot from an optical drive? Do you boot from a hard disk? Do you add a USB stick or whatnot? You can tell it its chipset, and on and on and on. And then once you tell it, now if you do that, if you tell it to use the optical disk, you may also have to point it at the disk drive. So like this. If you want to set up a startup disk, you can do that. So literally tell it, hey, you can use my D drive. It's your startup disk. Alternatively, you can find your ISO image in the same through this same way. If you're not going to use a physical disk, give it an ISO image. It'll boot from that, and on you go. And then what you have to do is walk through the process of installing that OS using whatever process is appropriate for it. What I've done so far is I've demonstrated installing some flavor of Fedora. I think it's either Fedora Security or the Network Security Toolkit. I can't remember off the top of my head. And let's see. Next thing we're going to do is talk about the VirtualBox Manager, the toolbar, the file menu, things like that. Thanks, and we'll keep going in just a minute.